In Massachusetts, sex ed, what is actually taught?
Everything from and to, I mean, maybe that's a good quote for the podcast today.
What? That's fine, keep going.
I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed preaching, but I wanted to preach about the sanctity of life. I wanted to preach about religious freedom. I just resigned from my position. I said, I feel like the Lord has something else for me. No job, 5 kids, mortgage. Within about a week, I got a call from MFI saying, hey, we just have this open position. What do you think? And oh, by the way, it would involve preaching about religious freedom and sanctity of life. I said, where do I sign up?
Yeah.
I always tell people when I go to the church, you're not alone. And you're not crazy for having a biblical understanding of the world. In July of 2017, about 200 Hispanics showed up at the city hall and got their city hall to vote 9-0 to ban recreational marijuana in the city of Lawrence. And there were literally Hispanic pastors preaching from 1 Corinthians and talking about how Paul would not agree with recreational marijuana in the city.
Awesome.
What? When I hear Christians saying, man, I can't wait to retire and move down to the South, how can you call yourself a Christian and just not care? You have the opportunity to be an Elijah in the midst of a nation run by Jezebels and Ahabs. Like, what a cool opportunity. Yeah, it's gonna be tough. Life's tough, suck it up.
I think you have courageous students like Liam Morrison. He's the 12-year-old kid that wore the shirt to school that said there's only 2 genders. I think it was like on a Wednesday he wore the shirt. Principal says, you're physically harming students. If you ask the Secretary of State's office how many churches are in Massachusetts, there's 8,000 churches in Massachusetts. Really, we are similar to a Bible Belt Midwestern state in terms of the number of churches.
But what's the disconnect? Is it more churches here are apostate? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sons of Liberty podcast. Today, we have got Mike King from Massachusetts Family Institute. I was about to say he's in our studio. We're in his studio. We're in his beautiful farm home. And today, we are going to be talking a little bit about what he does as well as the work in Massachusetts. Why don't you just intro,
Sure.
What is Massachusetts Family Institute?
Sure.
How did you get connected with them?
Yeah. So Massachusetts Family Institute is a family policy council. There are 40 family policy councils across the nation. So in New England, Connecticut has what we call an FPC, Family Policy Council. New Hampshire has one. Vermont does not. Maine has one. And so of the 40, we are one of the 40. We partner with a lot of great partner programs like Alliance Defending Freedom or Liberty Council, First Liberty. A lot of First Amendment, pro bono types of organizations. Our main mission is threefold: supporting the sanctity of life, supporting religious freedom, and then supporting pretty much anything that has to do with the family. So, we probably talk a lot today about education and just the amazing, I think, work that MFI and our partners across the state have been able to accomplish over, since COVID. COVID has really been a wonderful gift in that way to increase homeschooling and school options in Massachusetts.
Well, we were just talking about before the podcast how you were saying homeschooling had gone up 800%. Is that what you said after the pandemic?
Yeah, during
800%. That's crazy.
Yeah, one of the largest increases in the nation, if not the largest increase in homeschooling, was in Massachusetts of all places, and it went from 1.5% to 12.1%. And we're continuing to see a public school exit, not just in Massachusetts, but really across the nation. So we'll see. I mean, I think it's only going to continue. We really, I think, have just scratched the surface in terms of an exodus from the public schools.
What would you say is the main driving factor? Is it sex ed? Is it the curriculum? I know to boil it down to one thing is hard, but what would you say the main driving factor?
Yeah, it's interesting. So recent studies have shown that parents want an alternative to the public school, not necessarily because of academics. It's really things like safety, it's mental illness, character issues, morality, these kinds of things. And so I think there is such an incredible opportunity right now for the church. When we talk about the harvest, when we talk about evangelism, when we talk about, meeting the needs of our local communities, what other wonderful way than to offer K-12 education as a ministry to your community? And we're seeing more and more churches doing that.
Yeah. So before we get into the educational part, you are the acting chief executive officer.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what I saw on the website, man. What a title. Mass Family Institute. I know Andrew Beckwith. Wasn't he the previous executive officer?
That's
and
right.
then he moved down to South Carolina with his family.
That's right. Yeah.
So are you like standing in, or are you like, is this
So right now I'm
officially
the
your role?
interim CEO.
Okay.
And, excited about the opportunity to lead the organization. Been with MFI for about 8 years. Have spoken at about 200 different churches in Massachusetts. So, it's been really a wonderful relationship with the church that we've built. And, I can talk more about some of the religious freedom victories we've had during COVID, which I think really bettered our brand, if you will, with the local church. So we were no longer seen as perhaps this right-wing political organization, even though we are a nonpartisan 501c3, policy-driven organization. But what we were able to do, for example, to reopen the church in 2020 in phase 1, I think really then the church looked at MFI and said, oh, I might need you in the future.
Yeah.
And our service, especially of pro bono First Amendment attorney work, became a priority.
That's so needed. And as soon as like the churches started experiencing a little bit of pushback, I mean, dare I say persecution.
Sure.
Then they're like, oh my gosh, maybe we'll use this incredible resource that we have at our fingertips.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, it was, like I said, I've spoken at 200 different churches. And so pretty much anywhere I go now in Massachusetts, I feel like I know somebody. Mm-hmm. And it's a really wonderful interaction to have, where, I think MFI offers the pro bono First Amendment attorney work, and just as important, we are a hub for the local church when it comes to connections to be made. Whether that connection is, I'm a parent and I'm looking for a church-based learning center in my region. Where is that? Well, we can tell you where that is. Or my 12-year-old daughter is, a tomboy, and she now thinks she's a boy, and I need a counselor that's not going to prescribe puberty blockers. Can you help me find somebody? And yeah, absolutely. Here's a name and a number. Those kinds of important connections, in addition, of course, to the pro bono attorney work, has been vital. And I think now I get calls all the time on a daily basis of, some situation. The other day it was a gentleman down on the Cape at Cape Cod Community College, who you actually know the guy. So I was watching. I was watching a video online. I saw you in the audience. I was like, I know Sam. Talis, I think is his name.
Talis.
Yeah.
Talis. And he had a Jesus club. Still has a Jesus club, and there was a lot of persecution. He has an incredible personal story. I don't know if you know, his mom tried to abort him 17 times. When she was 19, he was her fourth child at the time. Survived all 17 abortion attempts, and now has this Jesus club. He's the student council president. He's in all kinds of leadership positions at the college. So he contacted us and he said, I'm getting persecuted on my Jesus club, and being told that I can't advertise it and these kinds of things. So we've been working with him to protect his religious liberty. And all kinds of things like that. That come up on a weekly basis.
That's awesome. Yeah. Talis is a great guy.
Yeah.
We've been friends for years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to be, so I'm doing if you're familiar with the Eric Metaxas 7 Men book, I'm doing a speech at the Father's Day event in Burlington that Refresh is putting on.
Is that the one Doug Wilson's going to be at?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So I'm doing instead of 7, I only have like 10 minutes, so I'm going to do 3 men, and I'm going to highlight him as one of them. Because I just thought his story was so compelling. I mean, his personal story about the abortion attempts, and then what he's doing to spread the gospel.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So before we get into the specific issues, let's just back up a little bit.
Sure.
Who is Mike King? Where did you come from? How'd you get to this place with Mass Family Institute? What gave you this passion, and why do you do what you do?
Yeah. So married to my wife Ashley. 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. Family is priority for me. And how I got to this place, I went to Messiah College back in the late 90s and was a political science major, and just always thought that the church had a very significant role to play in the culture. And, you guys know as well as I do that the church has really created a vacuum in not providing leadership on these issues of life, liberty, the family. And so long story short, I was a children's pastor, a youth pastor, very much involved in ministry for the first, 15 years of our marriage.
In Massachusetts?
In Massachusetts. Okay. And, just kind of tended to get a little more and more frustrated that the church wasn't, and I just thought, how great would it be because I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed preaching, but I wanted to preach about the sanctity of life. I wanted to preach about religious freedom, what the Bible has to say about those things, and how, and not just what the Bible has to say, but what can we do as a church practically to make a difference, right?
Yeah.
And so I ended up without kind of a job in the future and having 5 children. This is about 8 years ago. I just resigned from my position. I said, I just feel like the Lord has something else for me. And so didn't really have again, no job, 5 kids, mortgage, all that stuff. And within about a week, I got a call from MFI saying, hey, we just had this open position, what do you think? And oh, by the way, it would involve preaching about religious freedom and sanctity of life. And I said, where do I sign up?
Yeah.
So that was 8 years ago. And again, just had an opportunity to speak at about 200 different churches from behind the pulpit, have really gained, I think, an incredible perspective of the local church in Massachusetts. If you ask the Secretary of State's office how many churches are in Massachusetts, there's 8,000 churches in Massachusetts. And you compare that to, let's say, Iowa. Now, Iowa might be, half the size of Massachusetts population, let's say, but they have about 4,200 churches from what I understand. So really, we are similar to a Bible Belt Midwestern state.
Interesting.
In terms of the number of churches. And I'll tell you, just from anecdotal experience, we have so many immigrant churches in Massachusetts, especially Hispanic. In MFI, I think a lot of our success is due to our partnership with the Hispanic church. Also, there's a huge Slavic population in Western Massachusetts. I spoke at a Russian Pentecostal church, 800 members.
Wow.
Spoken there twice. First time I was, interpreted into Russian, translated into Russian, and they've ended up starting a school. They've been a great partner with us. There's another Ukrainian church out there that renovated a Big Y supermarket. So it's this huge building, and it's this Ukrainian church that probably most people in Massachusetts have never heard of, called Crosslight in West Springfield. And I could list many more churches like that. And it's so encouraging to know that the church is alive and well. Lawrence, Massachusetts, over 100 Hispanic churches in that one city. Wow. On one street in Worcester, there's 30 to 40 Hispanic churches on one street.
Oh my goodness.
Just say a quick story about Lawrence. So 2016 or 17, somewhere around there, is when Massachusetts passed recreational marijuana. And every city and town had the opportunity to opt out, to ban recreational marijuana, all 351 towns and cities. So although on the ballot question they had passed it at a state level, Lawrence, the Cape, whatever, still had the opportunity. So I think about 100 towns and cities ended up banning it on a local level. Well, Lawrence was the first city to ban recreational marijuana, and that was because the Hispanic church that we were working with directly, I was going literally on a Sunday morning, I would preach for 45 minutes from behind the pulpit, and for 20 of those minutes, I would talk about recreational marijuana, and I would show, the jelly beans and the all the ways they put marijuana in candy, and anyway, so long story short is in July of 2017, about 200 Hispanics showed up at the city hall and got their city hall to vote 9-0 to ban recreational marijuana in the city of Lawrence. And there were literally Hispanic pastors preaching from 1 Corinthians and talking about how Paul would not agree with recreational marijuana in the city.
Awesome. What? So where, geographically, where is Lawrence? Is it is that to this? That's
so
near Boston,
Lawrence
right?
is north on 93, where 495 intersects 93. So Methuen, Drakeit, Tewksbury, that area.
All right.
It's awesome to see the church actually doing its job and having an influence. I mean, imagine if 8,000 churches in Massachusetts, if they all had a homeschool
That's
co-op,
right. I say it all the
They all
time.
had a pastor that preached about political issues.
That's right.
Like that voting block right there would make
That's right.
Massachusetts a completely different state.
You're so right.
And so you said it would be it's akin to the Bible Belt states in terms of the amount of churches.
Yeah.
But what's the disconnect? Is it more churches here are apostate or taken over by nefarious actors, or are there or do you think it's majority pastors who just don't have the resources to do something, or maybe are cowardly in some way?
I think it's I think it's a mix, right? We are at a much better position than we were 8 years ago, just because of that relationship that MFI has been able to create with the local church. I say, look, it's 200 churches I've spoken at, so I kind of look at those churches as our closest concentric circle. And then when you look at the next concentric circle, I'd say 500. Now, why do I say that? Because in 2020, we had over 500 pastors sign a letter to the governor saying that the church is essential. So I think that's pretty impressive that over 500 Massachusetts pastors were willing to sign a public letter to Governor Baker saying the church is essential. It was that act, and it was Chris Casey, the pastor from what church? A church in Worcester, that he ended up suing the governor. He was criminally charged 3 times. We represented him pro bono. He won his case. All criminal charges dropped. So it was his lawsuit, and then it was the 525 pastors that Massachusetts opened, and it was May 20th or 19th of 2020. So it's like COVID had just kind of come in the picture in March or so in 2020. And then by May, so only 2 months later, Massachusetts is one of the first, if not the first, blue state to open churches in phase 1.
Wow.
Which I guarantee you never would have happened unless those two things happened: the pastor suing the governor, and the letter to the governor. So those are my 500. So when you look at the concentric circles, 200, 500, okay, and then you have the 8,000, right? But when I look at stories like the Revolutionary War, for example, 1776, where from what I understand from history, 3% of the colonialists actually fought in the revolution, which surprises a lot of people, right? Only 3%.
Yeah.
Well, 3% is a tipping point in that, so when I look at, 500 pastors out of 8,000 churches, let's say, well, what, 800 would be 10%, 400 would be 5%. So
We're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're there. And so that's why I get encouraged. And I always tell people, I always try to encourage people when I go out and speak, because I'm like, look, we don't need more than 3% to change this state. And in many ways, we are changing the state. I mean, we can talk more about flipping of school boards and, things like that have happened recently.
Well, maybe it's the 3% that is actually the minority right now that's actually fighting on the other side.
Right.
It might not even be as much of a majority as I
think that's absolutely. It's what do they call it? The tyranny of the minority.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should. The school board races have been very, very.
Yeah. Well, you know personally.
Yes.
So
Podcast lore for any of our faithful followers.
Yes.
no, I think and I'd love to learn from you guys too. Just what you see in your own generation. Age group in terms of these topics. I mean, I'm so encouraged that you ran for school committee. There was another gentleman your age, I think he was 19. He ran for school committee in Middleton and won.
Yeah, I think I had seen that.
He did.
Yeah, he was the youngest. I believe he's the youngest school committee member to ever win school board.
Wow.
Maybe in Massachusetts, but maybe it's just for Middleton. I don't know. But regardless, 19 is impressive.
Oh yeah.
How old are you?
19 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
You beat me.
yeah, I mean, run again for
I
sure.
will next year.
You know,
Got it.
and you said you got a ton of votes,
Yeah.
and MFI is only going to get more involved in this. You know, I was mentioning this past week we had 2 wonderful victories on the school board. Sutton, Massachusetts, where you had 3 months ago a drag queen come to the Connections Conference at the Sutton High School. Again, no Corey check, no sex offender check, and comes in and literally dances in a pink mini skirt up on a table in front of minors. And
How old were these kids?
14. Yeah. And needless to say, the Sutton population was in an uproar.
Oh yeah.
And so, as I was mentioning earlier, historic win for this lady, Jill. She got almost 1,000 votes as a write-in candidate. So she, you know, when you go to the ballot, the name is not there. You have to write it in. She got almost 1,000 votes. It was the most votes. It was two people were up for election, and she got the most votes. And they flipped the school board. So now they're in a position to create policy, and not only create policy, now they're in a position to hire and fire the superintendent. And I think the superintendent then hires and fires the principal. And so many people have an issue with the principal right now in Sutton. And so it looks like, you know, that could be one of the first things the school board does in Sutton. And then I mentioned earlier, Sharon, no conservative, necessarily not a conservative town. It's about 30% Jewish. And just from a grassroots kind of not, you know, organized from any organization outside, they flipped their school board. They got, I think, 3 new members that are all more conservative minded, especially when it comes to the wokeism and stuff like that.
You said that was on the South Shore?
I believe South Shore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So Sharon, so now they flipped their school board and they already have some ideas what they're going to do for policy.
Yeah. I'm just trying to give people an idea of where these towns
Yeah.
are, just so they can relate.
Yeah,
in a way.
And then Dighton Rehoboth is an all-star when it comes to they are leading the way. I mentioned earlier they passed 2 incredible policies. One, no political bias. If you can imagine, I mean, it's like we're getting so excited about taking politics out. Like that's a big win, but today it is.
Yeah.
You know. And basically, one of the things about the no political bias is, look, we don't come to school to talk about our sexuality, right? So why do we have all kinds of different flags that are, you know, talking about sex?
Yeah.
Like, can we just get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Yeah.
So basically, what that new policy does is said, okay, you know what? We're going to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic, and these sexual things, we're going to take it all down. Mm-hmm. And it's not that we're against anybody. It's just that's not for school. That's a private conversation you have with your parents, you know, your guardian or whoever at home, you know. Mm-hmm. So to see a school board pass that kind of policy was amazing. And then I mentioned the opt-in to sex ed. We talk so much about opting out of sex ed, but the opt-in to sex ed policy, where now you are not just, you know, expected to have sex ed. You have to sign up for it.
Okay.
So we believe that could, you know, reduce the amount of kids taking sex ed by, I don't know, 50, 60%.
Yeah.
Because, you know, especially what would be the alternative? Like, what's the alternative elective, right? So is it, I don't know, is it gym? Like, if it's like, we should lobby for like more a gym elective. Because then it's like gym or sex ed, you know, or study hall or sex ed, you know, it's like extra lunch break sex ed.
Yeah.
So what is, because I don't think a lot of people really know, like what is in Massachusetts sex ed, what is actually taught? Like what is so bad about it? Like some people just, it's just sex ed, you know, they just teach basics and, you know, but what are they actually teaching?
I think it's everything from anal sex and oral sex being normal to dental dams. I mean, maybe that's a good quote for the podcast today. But it's...
What? No. That's fine. Keep going.
Well, but I mean, as crazy as that is, that's what's being taught in 7th and 8th grade. The Get Real curriculum from Planned Parenthood has a chart of contraceptive. and dental dams are on there. The depot shot's on there. So in Lowell, on our Instagram page, we did a video about a 16-year-old girl that mom and dad had no idea she got this implant surgically put in her arm. It's actually 3 years, I believe, of birth control. And it's a surgical procedure to put it in, and it's a surgical procedure to take it out. And the only reason that dad found out about it was because his daughter was bleeding irregularly. And it's this kind of thing that, in the act of, safety, that we care about your children because we'd much rather them be on birth control than have an unwanted pregnancy. We're not just gonna preach, abstinence and that it always works and it's the best thing and it's the most responsible thing. So it's everything from the Planned Parenthood charts of contraceptive. It's many times it talks about parents of faith, that it's like they're kind of out of touch, right? So that's a major issue we see where parents tell us, my kids are coming home and, they're talking about the transgender issue and the sexual orientation issue, and this is completely normal. And, my principal thinks it's normal. My teacher thinks it's normal. My peers think it's normal. The only person that doesn't think it's normal
Is the parent.
is you, mom and dad.
Okay. It's isolating them, making them feel like they're out of touch.
That's right. Yeah.
A lot of boys our age are going like everybody that I talk to that's my age agrees that it's stupid. They're like, this is not. I saw one. There was like a meme that somebody was talking about, and it was like, I think they're bringing back these not so nice words to high school, like things that you would hear in a high school locker room. Maybe they're coming back because I think kids are naturally, or not naturally, well, they are naturally because they're naturally sinful, naturally rebellious in a lot of ways. And I think this might end up hopefully we can, as Christians, keep it to things that are actually respectful.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be a big pushback from a lot of kids who realize, hey, that this is not normal.
Well, yeah, the natural tendency for, like you're saying, young boys is to rebel, and now the status quo is degeneracy. So, well, all right, why not have a little rebellion? It might do us some good.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree, and I think we are reaching that tipping point. You have the detransition population that's coming out now, the Chloe Coles of the world, of course, and the Katie Andersons here in Massachusetts, and I think parents are just finding their voice. I think. A lot of times parents aren't going to do anything until it kind of hits home for them. And I think we're finally, 20% of Gen Z questions their gender.
It's
One out of five, and it hits young girls worse. I mean, look, I was working with a father in Arlington, Massachusetts, who his child transitioned, or at school, and this is a guy that is, left-wing Democrat voting, like definitely not on our page when it comes to, issues of life, let's say, or, whatever it might be. And he is just so upset with the school over this. So, this is an issue that it doesn't matter where your political views are on, it's just crazy.
Yeah, I had one more question about the sex ed thing, because I know people who are supportive of the way it is in Massachusetts say, oh, well, if you look at the teen pregnancy rate between Massachusetts I think has one of the lowest.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
Do you have any insight on why? Because seemingly to me, it's like, oh, well, maybe they are doing a good job in terms of preventing pregnancy. As like some states down south have some really, really high levels. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, I think I've seen those stats, and I don't necessarily know what the reason is for it. Basically the question is, why are young kids having less? Well, I guess it would be, why is there less teen pregnancy, right? And I think a lot of it is just, you see a rise in the sexual orientation stuff and the transgender stuff, right? I mean, does life come out of that?
No.
Right.
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
So, I think that would be a reason that would be high on my list.
Yeah. Even just homosexuality, even if that rate was higher, that would make sense.
Well, like I said, 20% of Gen Z is confused about their gender, right? And
you're right.
hitting young girls especially, right? So maybe young guys already have like not many options at school, and now more options of are like, I don't want to be with you because I'm transitioning right now, or I don't know. I mean, we're dealing with just unbelievable. I mean, this is just crazy.
The fact that we're even having these conversations.
I know.
I have so another thing.
It's crazy, but
yeah.
it's heartbreaking as well,
Yes.
because this is a really real issue for so many people.
Another thing for parents, because I've heard stories, we've had other conversations on the podcast about some schools are able to basically go through the whole, like you even brought it up a little bit, go through the whole transitioning process without the parents' consent. Is that actually happening? Is that
yeah. And this is one of the major concerns that's pushing this, is this lack of parental consent. You have the Ludlow case that went to the First Circuit now, and we're waiting. Hopefully in June we'll have an answer on this, where I believe a special ed teacher, I want to say, had the audacity to tell a father that his daughter was transitioning at school, and the school was hiding this information from parents. And we see this not only in Ludlow, we see this all over the place. Yeah. We lost that case. Shockingly and unsurprisingly, to a certain extent, lost the case at a district level. And so it got appealed to the First Circuit in Boston. And if it loses in Boston, obviously we hope it gets picked up by the Supreme Court. But this is why I think, again, this is why there is a public school exit in Massachusetts and around the nation, because parents are, it's like, what are you doing to my child?
Yeah. What is their legal justification? How is that even? How did the court not side?
Yeah,
with
that's
the
a great
parents?
question. And not being an attorney, I'm not as familiar with the reasoning, but I know it's always kind of nuanced.
That's what we always say on the podcast. It's like, you go to 8 years to become a lawyer, and it's like you forget what common sense is.
Yeah.
Like all this legal gobbledygook.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it even?
Yeah, I know. And you find things within the law that you think might relate to this, or a judge interprets it this way. I mean, this is why we are in a constitutional crisis, I believe, not just in Massachusetts, but in the nation, because we are not looking at it from an originalist, point of view, where
We're run by precedent. And
yeah,
a lot of
we're
times
run
that
by
precedent
we're run by
lead us astray.
precedent, but we're also, I think, more than precedent, we're run by just thinking that is, like I said, it's not originalist, but it's postmodern. It's relativistic. It's my truth is my truth, and once a judge starts thinking from that point of view, that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, you had it in the Revolution, and when the Constitution was being written, you had farmers, you had school teachers
Yeah.
that would go around. They would have these debates in churches. The Constitution went out to everybody, the documents, and they would read it and say, hey, I don't like this. I can read it with my own two eyes.
Right.
I don't need to be a lawyer to understand that this shouldn't be in there.
That's right.
And that's how far we've fallen
Yeah.
from
You're
the fact that
absolutely
a
right.
farmer used to be able to.
Yeah, and now like the legislation, we're just going on a little rant, but like
Sure.
the Massachusetts House, like for example, we did a lot of work talking about the gun bill HD 4420 that went through the House last summer, and now it's HD 4139 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, just trying to read through that original bill, unless you're a lawyer, you don't know what you're reading
Yeah.
because it's all references to prior bills,
Right.
amendments to prior bills, and then the things they add. Like it's
the
very
tax code.
complex to
It's
understand.
the tax code.
Yeah. So you need a summary, like
copy
even
and paste it into the legislation.
It's almost like it's intentional or something. Maybe they don't want people
for
to
sure.
understand.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So are teachers pushing back at all? Are teachers caught in the middle? Do we have any courageous teachers in Massachusetts? I'd say, unfortunately, there's not a lot that I'm aware of courageous teachers. I think you have courageous students like Liam Morrison, who, we're representing him now, who he's the 12-year-old kid that wore the shirt to school that said there's only two genders. I think it was like on a Wednesday he wore the shirt. Principal says, you're physically harming students. Literally, you're physically harming students by wearing the shirt. So Liam Morrison, we happened to get in touch with him 24 hours after, which I think just goes to show the kind of network now that we have, that we're able to get in touch with these people right away. And Friday, I think he goes back to school with a similar T-shirt. I think, I don't know, genders are censored at school or something like that. And he gets sent home by his principal, for a second time. And then, of course, now he's at the First Circuit. I think he lost on this district court. But from what I understand, I thought the hearing at the First Circuit went well for him. And I think it's such an interesting case that if he loses at the First Circuit, the Supreme Court, the chances of them picking up this kind of free speech case, which again, there is a difference between student speech, from what I understand. Again, I'm not an attorney, but student speech and teacher speech. So a teacher is contracted with the school, right? So you have things like school speech. So when a school hangs a particular sexuality flag, that's school speech that they have, a right to do. But and so teachers are a little more limited. So when it comes to like forcing them to say pronouns that they don't agree with and these kind of things, I mean, this is a situation we just had in Leominster, where a teacher there was this secret policy at Leominster schools of basically hiding transition from parents. I mean, a secret policy. And this teacher had just gotten off the mission field from like Indonesia. I mean, you're talking about a very convicted Christian. And he went right in front of the school board and said, look, you're telling me I need to lie. And, the word of God tells me as one of the 10 commandments, that it's something I shouldn't do. So he was let go. And now we're working, in Leominster to bring awareness to the case. But there is an example of a teacher fighting back.
Awesome.
And we'll see what the fallout is in terms of just what the people of Leominster want to do. I mean, we are hoping to work with the school board to pass a policy that would do away with that secret policy.
And I think it's important for people, even if you don't think you're going to win, if there's no conservative running for school board in your town, just
Throw your name in
Yeah.
there.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Why not? And just go out, say the thing, say,
Right.
oh, I saw this happen. If you disagree with this, vote for me. And make all the other school committee members
Absolutely.
answer to what's
Absolutely.
happening.
Well-
Because then we can really see who's for who and,
Well, to your point,
Yeah.
so this lady, Chanel Susi, ran for school board in Worcester 2 years ago. And single mom, had an incredible story. Now she was homeless when she was 14, 15, had 2 kids by the time she was 16. Now is a licensed electrician working for a union and very much worked with us on the opt-out from the very beginning in Worcester. And I think in her election, the winners got like 9,000 votes, and she had like 6,300 votes or something like that. But I told her, look, even though you lost, you really won because your platform was all about the opt-out of sex ed. And it makes a lot of sense to say that you were the main reason that I think it was like 27 in the first year of the opt-out in Worcester. There's 3 years now of the opt-out. It was 2,700 students that opted out. I think it was because of her school board race that caused that. So I always tell people, run not just to win. That doesn't necessarily have to be your main reason to run. To your point, raise awareness to these issues. And what better way to do that than the platform of running for
And it
school
gives you the
committee?
opportunity to talk to pastors in the area and try to encourage
Yeah.
them. And I think one of the main issues with New England in general is the spirit of apathy, even over over everyone. It's the whole Bostonian attitude. Yeah, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. Like whether you want to call it libertarian or kind of just disinterested, whatever. Like there's a sense of apathy where you don't really want to engage. People don't want to get involved. But when someone steps out and runs for something, gives them the opportunity to go out into leaders in the community and be like, hey, what do you think about this? It's almost just putting up the mirror.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? It's making them face reality, making pastors face reality.
Yep.
And that's so important for pastors to
Yeah.
be pressed on that. I mean, obviously in a loving biblical way, not calling them out because they're the leaders of the Christians in that community. And if you lose the pastors, you might lose the Christians in that community. But doing it in a biblical way, it gives them the opportunity to respond. And that's so important. And to your point with all these, you said you were talking about the spheres of 200 and then to 500 and then to rest of the 8,000. Like we have such an opportunity to capture the hearts of so many pastors.
And we have
across
already,
the state.
and to that point, I feel like we've captured enough hearts, right? And it's not just pastors. I mean, I think that Our strategy really with the church is we would love pastors because you are the leaders. You have incredible influence that you sometimes don't even realize that you have, especially on these issues. But, when we go into churches too, we say, hey, text the word, life to our short code 87891 or whatever. As we're talking, we have people that are signing up, so we don't necessarily have to just have that relationship with the pastor. Now we have a relationship with, I was talking about this Russian Pentecostal church in Westfield, Massachusetts that I spoke at with 800 members. Well, I spoke for 45 minutes. And again, I'm not so used to the Russian culture. So everybody's deadpan, and I'm like, and there were probably 3 times during my speech, and I'm like, did you hear what I said? Like,
Can I get an
can I
amen?
get an amen? And it's like, and so I'm like, all right, I just keep going. And so I didn't know it. I didn't know how they were receiving what I said. Well, after service, 295 cell phones were left. Numbers on our sign up sheets.
That's awesome.
Which is pretty much, if you think about it, 800 people. I mean, yeah. So that's every family, basically. Every family signed up for our text alert. So now we have about 8,000 cell phones that we regularly communicate with through our texting. And I just think it's super powerful, and that 8,000 is super powerful, to be able to communicate with. So
when our Turning Point USA chapter had hosted Chloe Cole last June for Teens Against Gender Mutilation, you graciously, MFI was awesome for that. We could not have done that event without you guys. You hosted our RSVP page because Eventbrite took us down for having, for hate speech or whatever. Yeah. And then you I was seeing texts probably once every other week. Yeah. Just of go to this rally for a couple months. Well, and it's so powerful.
Well, that's why I say we become a hub. We're not only a First Amendment attorney organization, we are a hub that can help organizations like you guys get your messaging out, because we've been pounding the pavement for 8 years, talking from behind the pulpit. And that's exactly what we have to do. A great example of this was the Reclaiming Education Conference we just did in Weston, Mass, where we had this goal of having 120 people, from church leaders, pastors, come out to our Reclaiming Education. This is to start a church-based learning center. Well, we didn't really do any phone calls. We just sent out maybe, a handful of emails, maybe 3 text blasts. And because of that, we had 150 people register from 70 different towns and cities across the state, which just goes to show the reach of the different regions in Massachusetts that we're connected to. And I think, when you can do a Tuesday, I think it was on a Tuesday from 9 to 3. So when you can get that kind of interest just from a text and an email, I think it not only shows the being connected to people, but it shows the brand as well, that people are like, oh, that's an MFI event. I want to go to that. That has value, So we're just super blessed to, now kind of 7-8 years into this, kind of start to have that kind of influence.
Man. So what would you say, you were talking about a little bit before, but so the church-based learning centers.
Yeah.
What is it? How is that the hands and feet, and how? Because we can talk about running for school committee, and changing the public school system. Yeah. But how do we as Christians and churches, do our own thing instead of relying on Caesar?
Right. No, great. No, we can talk theologically about that if you want to. Whose kids are Caesars? Are they mine as the parent, or are they Caesar's? No. So the opt-out movement exposed the problem. And so we didn't want to just expose the problem, because what good does that do? It's like, okay, 4,000 kids opted out of sex ed. We had there was one story where 50% of a 3rd grade class opted out, which I'm like, that's awesome, right? Because think about that. Half the class when sex ed is started gets up and goes to the library, right? That's pretty cool. Yeah. So we're like, okay, that's great. But what happens when mom and dad are just like, I can't deal with the wokeism. I'm glad we have an opt-out, but it's in my math class, it's in my English class, it's in my science class, it's evolution that I don't want taught, it's CRT, it's SEL, it's all of this stuff. So I said, okay, well, we need a solution for that. People need a place to go. And so I mentioned this, concentric circle of 200 churches, right? So those are the first churches that we're looking at and saying, you need to start, just like when a church was started in New England. If you started a church, you also started a school. And so, you wouldn't even build a town. Like, you could not establish a town without a church, right? So we're trying to...
There were meeting houses. Everything was revolved around a meeting house.
That's right.
People would have
One room
services in there.
schoolhouse,
Yeah.
right?
Services, go to school there. They'd have town meetings there.
That's right.
Everything was one.
That's right.
Yeah.
The house that we're in right now is where the town clerk was back in the 1800s, right? Or the 1900s.
That doesn't sound like separation of church and state to me.
That's right. But so this is about 2 years ago. We started saying, okay, church, you have two things. You have a building, which is available space. And many times, as you know, our churches are not full during the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And you really only need one room necessarily. So many of our forefathers were educated in a one-room schoolhouse. And then you need people. And the church has both of those. I mentioned the Westfield Learning Center earlier. 47 students, 35 volunteers. Talk about almost 1-to-1 ratio of proctor to student. And that's a K-12 learning center. And I think, before the Reclaiming Education Conference, we had 17 learning centers that were serving about 400 to 500 students. And our goal was to create 10 more church-based learning centers so at the end of the conference, I kind of had this quote unquote altar call. I was like, should I do it? I was like, I'll do it. Because the whole conference, I was just saying, the goal is 10 more learning centers, 10 more learning centers. So at the end, I'm like, okay, if you want to start a learning center, come up front, And exactly 10 came up front. Exactly 10.
Dude.
Wow.
That's the Lord right there.
Yeah. So I was, everybody was just really excited and pleased about it. And, to have partnerships now with national organizations like Herzog Foundation. I don't know if you're familiar with them. $350 million left by Stanley Herzog, who was in the railroad industry. Died in 2019, I want to say, or somewhere around there. It left $350 million to be spent on Christian education.
Wow.
So now all of these learning centers, Herzog loves what we're doing. Their president came out to our Reclaiming Education Conference, and they they basically offer pro bono, best in class training for, you want to be are you a mom that, needs to teach science for your local learning center and you don't have a science degree? Herzog will train you for free. You pay to get there, and they put you up in a hotel. They give you all the training. They have trainings on creation at the Creation Museum. They have you can go to the Ark in Kentucky and take their trainings on creation. Just so many things they're doing. And then you have the Children's Scholarship Fund, what I mentioned earlier, who's offered us now a $75,000 matching gift program for scholarships for church-based learning centers. And now states like Virginia are reaching out to us and saying, what are you guys doing in Massachusetts with the church-based learning center? Like that sounds awesome, especially for a state that's having a difficult time with school vouchers, And so now Virginia's interested in what we're doing, and more states are, trying to, this is, so I think we just scratched the surface on the church-based learning center thing. It's nothing new. We're not recreating the wheel. The church always saw K-12 as a ministry. Yeah. We never should have given it to the government, to do. And so I'm excited. I think
this is so exciting.
I think that we are in a renaissance of sorts. People think that we're headed off a cliff, and in many ways we are. But it's so bad that the people that are apathetic are kind of like, okay, this is too much for me. And MFI is in a strategic place to step in and say, here's a solution.
Yeah, and it's almost like as the culture around us reforms basically to how it was before with child sacrifice and all the crazy sex stuff.
Sure.
That was all happening throughout history.
Pre-1776, basically. Yeah.
All of it was happening, government tyranny, all those
Yeah.
things. And now we're seeing, but also the church, you look at even like St. Patrick, not St. Patrick's Day, the actual St. Patrick.
Sure.
He went to Ireland, he built a bunch of churches.
Yeah.
And like you said, a school was attached to every single
Yeah.
church. That was just a given.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool to see the reforming of both I don't know, the world and the church in a way.
Well, yeah,
One more thing.
yeah,
Sorry.
Sure.
What was that guy's name who left $350 million?
Stanley Herzog.
Shout out to Stanley Herzog, because on the podcast, Christ-filled conservatism, that's who we are. But also cash-filled conservatism.
Yeah.
Because that's what matters. That dude, $350 million, if we had more of that, that would be.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mentioned the Children's Scholarship Fund, right? This is a kind of a secular organization that's been giving scholarship granting organization. But, this is an organization started probably, I don't know, about 30 years ago, has given out up to $1 billion in scholarships. And the lady that leads it is a believer.
Awesome.
And so when we first met, this is probably a year ago, last August in Chicago. And I was like, oh, my name's Mike King from MFI. She's like, well, what do you do? Oh, we're doing these church-based learning centers. And she's like, oh, what are those? And like right away, she was connected. And I was like, and she's probably top 3 influential people when it comes to this whole school voucher education freedom movement in the United States. And she's looking at us and saying, how do we support you?
Awesome. And it's super exciting, because it's almost like with the school voucher thing, as Christians, we can spend money better than anybody else can. And it's almost like, okay, you spend 20 grand per kid.
Right.
We're like, just give us
Yeah.
7 grand, 5 grand.
right.
Like, we could do it for so much cheaper. We
Right.
could actually, the government might be looking to us and saying, hey, we kind of need to save money here.
Yeah.
Do you want to just take your kids and send?
Well, look at the Westfield Learning Center, $400 per family per year. I mean, it's like,
you can't even make it up. It's like,
well, because the value is in the people. It's not, it isn't expensive when you have committed people. Again, 35 volunteers serving 47 students. I mean, this is the model.
The great lie of top-down American education currently is that more money is going to fix the problems.
Right.
Just throw more money at the school system.
Right.
Right? Just like you throw more money at it, that'll definitely fix the problem.
Yeah.
So I think Chicago is probably like the richest school, has like the richest schools in
Or
America.
Massachusetts even. I mean, it's like $22,000 per kid,
And look at the outcome, So, but when it has so much more to do with the value of the person teaching the child.
I mean, look at the Grow Learning Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. This is the largest Hispanic church in Worcester. And they started 2 years ago. They had 3 kids. This year was their second year. They have 60 kids. And they do 5 days a week. And they next year, they have 150 kids signed up.
Man.
Yeah, or interested. And I don't even know if they can serve that many kids.
Mm-hmm.
And now they have shared the Learning Center idea with another church with the same name, Vida Nueva, in East Boston, which is another large Hispanic church. And then there's another large Hispanic church on the South Shore in Weymouth called Harvest Ministries. They're interested in a learning center. And then you have Vida Real in Somerville. This is probably the largest Hispanic church in Boston, other than like Lion of Judah or a church like that. They just started the Real Life Learning Center, which is an actual school. So you have 4 of the largest Hispanic churches, probably top 10. 4 of the top 10 Hispanic churches are doing either a school or a learning center.
This is kind of a specific question, but I'm curious. Have you had any Calvary chapels in Massachusetts get involved?
Yeah, there's a learning center at Calvary Chapel in Pittsfield.
Okay.
I've spoken at the Calvary Chapel in Rockville. I think Rockville, is it Rockville?
Because I know they're a powerful movement, and historically,
I would
like
say
it was the Jesus Revolution of the 60s and 70s. So I'm curious about how their involvement has been with you guys.
Yeah,
not really like trying to like test them against the standard. I'm just curious.
They're a great denomination, to work with. I mean, look, you guys are from the South Shore Cape area. New Hope in Plymouth. They started a learning center.
Yep.
And I've been so impressed with that church. They have not been bashful about addressing these issues, these cultural issues, and they've seen nothing but growth in their church. I mean, I think they're in the process of building like an $8 million church in Plymouth.
Yeah. And we interviewed Neil Eaton on the podcast and we asked him about it. He was like, and I was saying like, where did you find the courage? Why did you start speaking of cultural issues? And the thing he said was very interesting. He was like, people come to church wanting their pastor to speak on these cultural issues, because if their pastor doesn't, then other people in the culture are going to fill that gap.
That's right.
You know, like where the church doesn't invade, the devil's going to take over.
That's
if
right.
the church seeds ground, the devil's
That's
going to
right.
pounce.
Yeah.
Absolutely pounce on that.
Yeah.
So Neil's like, you know, the way he said it was like, these people are there waiting. They're just waiting
Yeah.
for like, please speak about
Yeah.
these issues. Please speak up for life. Like, why are my kids being taught transgenderism
Yeah.
at 7 years old? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on? Like, help us. And when you provide those answers to a general, not even Christian population,
Mm-hmm.
but to a general population in your town, with Neil's situation, it's the town of Plymouth, who is just fed up with the current state of things.
Yeah.
If they hear a Christian pastor saying that, doesn't matter who it is, they hear someone speaking truth, they're going to go there and be
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I agree with them. And then, hey, we can preach the gospel to them. And then that's how you grow churches and start learning centers, and
Yeah.
not only help these scared parents out in the community, but give them a place where they can plug in into a church, into a learning center like New Hope has.
Yeah, I had a powerful experience at New Hope last time I was there. It was May 1st, 2022. And there's certain times in my, I guess, career that I call it like a culture bomb or something that, you know, was dropped. You know, where you just feel like the move of the Spirit, something just effective outside of my control, just supernaturally happened, right? So I was preaching on a Sunday morning for about 25 minutes at New Hope, and I was toward the end of my speech, and it was all about education. I was talking about the learning. This is the time where I talked about, you know, New Hope should start a learning center, and Stephen and Charbonneau are in the audience, and they come up to me afterwards. So I think I was saying something along the lines of, you know, we need the Spirit's help or something like that. And right when I said Spirit, like, I never do this, but I just like broke down, like in front of all these people, like 500 people. And it's like one of those times, I don't know if it's ever happened to you guys, but like, you just can't stop it. Like, it's just like, please don't. And then you just start. And so it's just kind of this silence, right? Because I'm in the middle of talking or whatever. And then I'm just like, you know, I can't control my emotions. But it was powerful because, you know, Neil comes up on stage and he just like basically summarizes the importance of what we're talking about, how our kids are on the front lines, they're the target. And, you know, it's, you know, better to have a millstone tied around, or, you know, to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown in the bottom of the sea than cause one of these little ones to fall into sin, right? And so, yeah, he puts his hand on my shoulder, summarizes, and then the entire congregation stands up and just starts applauding. And just the energy in the room was just like, okay, something's going to happen out of this, right? And it did. The Learning Center, and 2 years later, the testimonies of the kids coming out of that, you know, where, you know, kids that were bullied in the public school and on the verge of suicide and now are, you know, on the verge of going to college. And so it's experiences like that that get you excited and say, you know, to your point that, you know, we are on the verge, I believe, of I called it a renaissance before, but I really do believe that.
word.
I really do believe that.
So how do you take these powerful experiences, and how would you communicate that to a pastor that isn't necessarily all for everything you're talking about? Either they may agree, like, yes, they know it's true. They know life begins in conception. There are only two sexes. Like, they know these things are true, but they're scared.
Yeah.
They don't have the, you know, either they're scared, they don't have the resources.
Yeah.
They're, you know, they struggle with a spirit of cowardice or apathy.
Yeah.
How would you, I mean, I'm sure you've done this all the time, but how do you communicate to those pastors?
Yeah.
How do you try to reach their hearts in a biblical way?
Yeah, I think I just tell them the stories, because it's one thing to say, you know, what is the biblical worldview of life? What is the biblical worldview of religious freedom? And that's great and it's needed. But in my mind, it's like, well, what is the practical, how do we live this out on a local level and affect our school board and affect our schools and affect, you know, the local pregnancy care center and, you know, all these different things. So I tell them the stories of, okay, like let's make this super practical, right? So why do I think you should talk about the sanctity of life, right? Like the Calvary in East Hampton, let's say. Why should you talk? Well, because in East Hampton, the city council about a year ago said, well, we're going to pass an ordinance to fine the Bethlehem House, which is this local PRC, Pregnancy Resource Center in East Hampton, for false advertising practices, right? Because you offer a pregnancy care test, reproductive health care of a pregnancy care test, but you don't offer the reproductive health care of an abortion. Thus, you're tricking women who are coming in for reproductive health care, and all of a sudden, for some reason, you want to try and save the baby. Like, how dare you, right? And we're going to fine you for that, Well, if the church didn't stand up in East Hampton, where we had literally record crowds, and now that Calvary Church in East Hampton was making announcements in their bulletin about showing up to the city council meeting, and then the security guard calls me and says, doesn't call me, but we just heard from him saying that there were record crowds of over 100 people, mostly pro-life, showing up in East Hampton. And the long story short is, after 14 months of this effort on a local level, the city council votes to pass the ordinance. The Democrat mayor vetoes the ordinance within 24 hours. She never used her veto since being elected in 2017, but she chooses to use her veto for the first time on a life issue of all things. And then the city council 2 weeks later calls a special election to override her veto, and they just need everybody to vote the same way. Well, Omar Gomez, the president of the city council, has a second thought about this thing, and I was able to call him actually right before the final vote, and he voted the other way, and thus the veto of the mayor stood. And this was in East Hampton. This is like next door to Northampton, where Smith College is. This is one of the most liberal areas of the state, where life won. And I just think it's those kinds of stories where the local church gets involved and then says, oh, because of the work you did, local church, Bethlehem House can continue to serve mothers in crisis.
It's stories like these that just irk me when I hear Christians saying, man, I can't wait to retire and move down to the South. Like this, as Massachusetts is going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
There's nothing for us up here, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, you obviously are so out of touch, and you're like, oh my gosh, it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
It's like how can you call yourself a Christian and just not care and just think like God put you here for a reason. You were born in this area for a reason, and you're just going to leave.
Yeah.
Like, you have the opportunity to be an Elijah in the midst of a nation run by Jezebels and Ahabs. Like what a cool opportunity. Yeah, it's gonna be tough. Life's tough. Suck it up. Like how fun is that? Like, it's just it's just straight
Especially
adventure.
that
and you're gonna run
success
away
story.
to Florida. I mean, I love it's where Woke goes to die. I love it, but like, we're here for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much hope.
Well, let me encourage you with this. So at our Reclaiming Education conference, we had this guy come up from the Florida Citizens Alliance. So all the way from Florida, comes to our, little 150 attended Reclaiming Education conference. And I said to this guy's name was Rick, and in Florida, they have universal school voucher. Okay. Upwards of like 10 grand per kid.
Wow.
Okay. So if I were to move to Florida tomorrow, that's 50 grand for my 5 kids. 50 grand.
Can you just like pocket that and save it for college?
Like you get, but like if I want to send them to a Christian school or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like,
try.
so I go, Rick, I go, if I were in Florida, like this would be like shooting fish in a barrel. Like every church, you have all this available funding. And freedom of education freedom movements are definitely taking off in Florida. But Rick says, look, we're not seeing anything like you're seeing here in Massachusetts with the church-based learning centers. I go, really? I go, why? He's like, because there are no doers in the church in Florida. And he's looking at us in Massachusetts and saying,
Ooh.
you have doers. here in Massachusetts. I wish he's jealous of us, and he's from Florida. So I was just really taken back. I mean, I was blessed by that, encouraged by that, that he would travel all the way from Florida to learn how he can be a doer, to do church-based learning centers in Florida. So
That's-
it's not always about the money.
Yeah.
Shout out Massachusetts.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, like there's great things going on in this
Yeah.
state.
And the fulfillment from that, seeing that city council member turn.
Yeah,
Like that is
effect.
why we do what we do. Like that
Yeah.
is so much more than any, golfing trip in Florida or any,
Sure.
alligator in your backyard or whatever. Like,
Sure.
I don't know. That's so much more valuable. And to see the church, and I think the reason why it was successful is because it wasn't those people. It was the Spirit of God. When somebody, that's like a Holy Spirit
Yeah.
conviction that guy must have had
Yeah,
to be able to, and that mayor to go against her party,
I know.
everything. Like that's only something the Holy Spirit
Yeah.
can do, and that's what happens when the church, which is God's kingdom on
Yeah.
earth, actually does their job.
Yeah.
It's so encouraging.
well, that's why I say if it can happen in East Hampton, it can happen anywhere.
right.
You
So pastors,
Yeah,
let's do it.
yeah, and pastors. I mean, just see the practical way. Like nobody's gonna think that's political.
Yeah.
When you give the narrative, right? Like
Yeah.
I just gave you. Who in the congregation is going to look at that and be like, I'm leaving the church. I can't believe you saved the Bethlehem house from being fined and shut down. I mean, just
And if they do,
Like
they
good
weren't meant to be
riddance.
there anyway.
Good
Yeah,
riddance.
I mean,
Like,
and
if
that's-
you don't want people in your body of Christ who aren't going to support the sanctity of life.
Yeah.
Like I'm sorry, like I think it's totally okay to have a church, like a large church that is whittled down,
Yeah.
and let the chaff leave.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
you get the real thing.
No, and
it's
that's what I keep telling
refined,
our
it's the
staff.
beautiful
I keep telling our
church.
staff, I go, as much as I'm sympathetic to the entire population of Massachusetts, in this sense, the entire church population, right? This big tent. I go, I'm really speaking to our choir. And we need to understand who our choir is. And if our choir is only 3% of the church population, then that's what our choir is. And you know what? That's enough. That 3% of the church is enough. And once you have victory like we're having, then that next 3% starts to kind of look in and say, oh, you guys aren't as crazy as I thought you were. I might actually join you.
Yeah.
But if you compromise on that first 3%, then you're going to lose them too. And you can't lose that 3%. That's your choir.
I think that was the part of the problem. I'm going back to the Chloe Cole event we had last summer. Part of the problem with advertising that, I hate the word advertising, that sounds weird, but bringing Chloe's story to churches in the area. Part of the problem was that we did kind of come off to the churches like how MFI came off to the churches pre-COVID. It's like all far right wing. Like I don't know what's going. I don't know. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think now that we had that event and the fact that we had 300 people show up from all different ages, Christian, non-Christian, coming from all the way from like Boston and like, I think that in a lot of ways, it moved the needle. It moved the Overton window in Massachusetts and
Sure.
what pastors are willing to discuss. I mean, we had one example of a pastor who, first pastor I met with when promoting the rally, he said, I don't want to come off as political to my congregation. He is conservative. I don't want to come off as political. And week and a half before the rally, he went all the way to promoting it in the pulpit and pointing me out in the congregation. And like, so that was an example of a pastor believing it all along. I wasn't telling him anything new, that transgenderism was wrong and bad for kids and harmful and that there are only two sexes. He knew that. But once he heard it, it's like putting up the mirror, like I was saying earlier. He was able to see it, think about it, and he sent me an email letting me know he was going to do that. And it like, what a great testimony.
Yeah.
And that's on Cape Cod. Like,
Yeah, no,
That's-
look, I
that's
mean,
incredible.
you make me think about another story on the Cape, which recently, this was Religious Freedom. There was a pharmacist down in the Cape that worked for a very well-known pharmacy. And this particular pharmacist did not want to fill the chemical abortion prescriptions. And she attends a very large church on the Cape. And so we helped her fill out a religious exemption, and fairly quickly the pharmacy was like, yeah, sure, you don't have to fill those prescriptions.
Wow. What church was it?
So she goes to, I believe, well, I don't know. I'll probably keep it anonymous for now.
We can bleep it out. Okay. All right.
But I know I've been to the church for 2 separate events. Now I've never spoken on a Sunday morning, and I'm not sure the church is quite there yet.
Okay.
So I haven't, but like I know some of the influential leadership at the church, and having that conversation with the influential leadership, and then giving them this practical story from a person that I'm sure they're not going to look at as like crazy in any way, right? I mean, this is a pharmacist that, this is a real issue.
Yeah.
It's those kinds of stories that start to, like you said, kind of like tear down those walls and say, okay, I can now see the practical work that you're doing. And I want, like, it's not so much like, oh, should I? No, I want to tell my congregation about this, because this is real life for them.
Man.
Amen.
So, one final thing.
Yeah.
This is a podcast by Gen Zers for Gen Zers in a lot of ways. Sure. That's our target demographic. Yeah. What is your message to young conservative men in Massachusetts?
My, I always tell people when I go to the church, you're not alone and you're not crazy for having a biblical understanding of the world. And I would even say this, is that your biblical understanding is very attractive to the world. When we have these stories about, church-based learning centers that are saving kids from, kids that were bullied and on the verge of suicide and now are on the verge of going to college, right? Or you have the Pregnancy Resource Center, Bethlehem House, that can now serve women in crisis, right? Because of what we did. The pharmacist that no longer has to fill those prescriptions. The religious freedom issues, the reopening of the church, the Liam Morrisons of the world, the First Amendment issues, free speech, the helping this Leominster teacher that, was fired because he didn't want to lie about gender transition. I think all of these stories are very compelling to young men. The fact that you ran for school committee at 19, so inspiring, right? And I mean, I think too, when men start to lead and take, ownership of not just your own life, but take ownership of your town, take ownership of your community, take ownership of your faith. I mean, so many Gen Z men, I'm sure are looking for like a wife, for example, right? I mean, not to like go on a tangent, but
Go for it.
What a great way to like attract the kind of lady that you want to be your wife someday. And it seems like my wife was just showing me a video, my kids a video about what's this new trend about like trad
wives.
Trad wives.
Yeah.
But I think in many ways, like we're getting back, like people are so sick of the concrete jungles that we live in our cities, and that we're getting away from agriculture and nature, and like people want to reconnect with gardens and like this seems to be like a trend,
sure.
if you will. Like
We call it touch grass. Go outside and touch grass.
That is what it is.
Yeah. So, and I think, and it's not just about attracting the wife that you want. It's just being human.
Yeah.
Like people want to get back in touch with humanity. I mean, when we look at the trans culture, when we look at the looking at your phone all day and the technology and all that stuff, I think we're getting to a tipping point as well. We're probably already tipped on it, especially I think with young men that are just like craving
Truth.
What does it mean to be
real.
a man?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be like a hunter gatherer? My son and I just started going hunting for deer over the past couple of years. My second time out, my 17-year-old son gets his first deer, his second time ever hunting. And it was an ultimate thrill.
Yeah.
For him, for me, right? He's I mean, just over the moon that he was able to provide meat for the family. It's those kinds of, standing up in the gap, being courageous, that when men start to play that role, when men start to say, I'm responsible for the health of my community, I think that's when we really truly start to live.
What a way to end it. That's awesome. I honestly, I could go for 3 more hours. This is incredible. There are so many topics we could cover. I'd love to do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just honestly, we didn't get to it, but just tackling like singularly tackling the issue of fatherlessness and how that leads to all these different other issues we talked about today. Yeah. But we appreciate it, Mike. We appreciate all the work you're doing.
Absolutely.
And it is definitely reaching young men across the state, and I mean we can see it. So
that's awesome. Yeah.
And if you just want to plug like your resources, like give you a plug.
Yeah. How can people find you, MFI, you personally?
Yeah. So I mean, people can obviously go to our website, www.mafamily.org, mafamily.org. You can also access our text line, which is how we communicate a lot of our information. So we talked about a lot of different topics today. We talked a lot about education. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing in education with church-based learning centers, you can text school option to our short code 87891. Again, school option to 87891. And there are many other keywords, but I think we'll just focus on that one, for today, because there is so much energy. Actually, if you want to run for school committee, like Hunter, you can text the word school to 87891. We offer trainings, not just for advocacy, but for also people that want to run for school committee. And then once you get on school committee, how to be an effective school committee member. So that's school, text word school to 87891. But yeah, I just hope that you guys enjoyed the podcast, and I'm excited for the next opportunity to meet, and I'm excited about the future of Massachusetts, because anything good that happens in Massachusetts, people take notice.